Paul via shopdap.com wants to know how common is a TSI tensioner failure. I have a 2011 GTI and have been affected by some of the other common MK6 items such as a high pressure fuel pump, low pressure fuel pump, and water pump. My car has 58,000 miles on it, so I'm very close to being out of powertrain warranty. Should I look into replacing the tensioner at this point? What is the typical cost of having a shop do the replacement?
Okay, Paul. So should you replace your timing chain tensioner as a preventative? I would say absolutely 100% yes. And here's why. Replacing it is going to be fairly costly. Our kit is around $250 with the cover, the updated timing chain tensioner, and some sealant and the tool, the special tool for installing it. Labor for that, I'm not sure about it, but I'd say it's roughly around 4 or 5 hours. Now you're looking at probably, roughly around $700 or $800, which is pretty expensive. But here's the alternative. The alternative is to drive the vehicle and hope it doesn't break. If it does break, you're looking at somewhere in the $4,000 range, which is obviously a pretty big leap from $800 to $4,000. You can almost say you can't afford not to replace it because the alternative is a $4,000 bill that you're gonna be stuck with, assuming there's no other major damage to the engine. Now that's another thing that recently I've had people reach out to me saying that the dealer contacted them after having this problem where the timing chain tensioner busted, and they're being told that they have to replace the complete engine, roughly to the tune of about $8 grand. And I've had 2 or 3 people contact me and tell me that and ask me if does that seem legitimate, can you get me an engine, all that stuff. Most people in those situations seem to go towards the route of getting a used engine just because it is more cost effective to get your vehicle back on the road. Now, also a side note on that, if you're planning to get rid of the vehicle, not replacing your timing chain tensioner is fine as long as you're planning on doing it, somewhere in the near future. The reason why I reached out to a dealer friend of mine in New Jersey who told me that they actually have recommended engines to customers in the past, but for specific reasons. So the reason why he said was most common that they would recommend an engine would be because of lack of maintenance. So the timing chain tensioner, it has oil pressure driven in some parts of it. And so if you have either low quality oil or extend the life too long on your oil changes, it could create a situation where the poor quality creates a clog, and that's why the tensioner fails prematurely. So poorly maintaining your vehicle could even expedite the process of a timing chain tensioner failing. So in that situation, what he said is that what they're finding is on those cars that have been neglected, that they pull down some of the rod bearing and main bearing caps and find that they're scored. And so what that scoring is an indication of is damage to the bearings and that the engine would actually need to be rebuilt. In that particular instance, most often with VW, if you're talking about tearing down an engine, rebuilding it, and the cost of labor, parts, and all that stuff combined, it generally tends to be more cost effective to replace the engine. That way, number one, you're getting a fresh engine. Number two, obviously there's no question marks as far as what other problems there could be with problems were created by the lack of maintenance on that particular engine. So in that instance, it makes sense completely that you would replace an engine. Otherwise, the only other instance I could see replacing an engine because of bent valves would be if it was a high RPM when the timing chain popped, and let's say 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 RPM, which caused the valve to actually damage the internals of the engine. So it blew through the piston, or it broke off completely and jammed through the block, something like that. It happens, but it's not generally common. Most times when those pop, as far as I'm concerned, and I've been aware of with some of the general consensus of people, it just bends valves. You replace the cylinder head, and then it's all done and fixed. We put together a kit for that. It's roughly around $1,800, and it includes the cylinder head with the valves and gaskets and timing chains and all that stuff. In that case, you're replacing cylinder head, valves, timing chain, all that stuff, and you're looking at probably somewhere in the range of about, let's say, even if it's not from us and you're paying somewhere in the $2,500 range for the parts, and you're probably $1,000, $1,500 for labor, you're gonna be somewhere in the $4,000 range for the total repair, and that's probably more realistic for most people. Just something to be aware of, and obviously keep an eye on. Definitely wanna get that tensioner replaced.